Hello, thank you all for being here today. I want to recognize all the youth that's here. Stand up, guys. You are the leaders. Come on. They don't want to do it. We'll take questions from the
We
leaders.
wouldn't like to stand with you until we see bold climate action on the crisis.
Fantastic.
At the scale we need.
That's great. Let's give them a hand for that. That's amazing. Thank you for that. That's really great. I really want to recognize this youth and other youth, not just here in Seattle, but across the world. As many of you know, I had the great honor of representing our city at the C40 Climate Conference in Copenhagen. And the most moving two events I went to was one, a roundtable for youth from around the world, and then a press conference at which those youth talked about the impacts on them, their future, and their communities. We are here today because we are in a climate crisis, and we are being powered by and led by our youth, and we also are doing it for our youth and for their future. I am very excited to be able to sign this executive order to build on the previous work we've done and to recognize that the city of Seattle as a city has to play a key role, not just here, but around the globe and around the country to move our climate strategies forward and to do all we can to save the planet. I mean, I think many of us have been watching in horror after climate emergency has evidenced itself on our planet. And just in the last few weeks, watching what has happened in Australia and seeing a huge swath of that country and has been estimated 1 billion animals lost. We know why that is happening, and we know that we need to take even greater strides here and across the country to change that. We've seen it here in Seattle also. This last summer we were fortunate because we didn't have the same kind of hot summer and burning forest fires, but we had 2 summers where the smoke emergency was real here and where the city of Seattle had to retrofit its buildings to make them a safe place for community, particularly for those with health issues and the seniors. We know that if we don't take steps today, the time is running out. So the number one thing we have to do as a city and as a country and as a world is end our dependence on fossil fuels. The science is absolutely clear, and we know that we must move quickly. So I am announcing today that all new or substantially altered municipal buildings must run without fossil fuels and instead run on clean power. And that means that city buildings can't be built to be dependent on fossil fuels going forward. We also are going to be directing all our city departments to double their efforts and develop a strategy citywide for the elimination of fossil fuels from all existing buildings and all projects underway to get that plan to meet. Because we know that just changing the trajectory of what we will do is not enough. We need to show that you can and must change what's already in place. This executive order is about the city setting an example, both for other cities in this region, but also showing that you can thrive as a city and be good on climate, and that you cannot thrive as a city if you are not smart on climate. We have to do it in a way that we both recognize and address how much of environmental justice has fallen on communities, and that at our heart, every action we take has to not just make sure that we are being equitable and using our RSJI principles, but we have to recognize that so many communities are starting from a lesser position because for years they have borne the burden of environmental injustice. And if you look in our own city, you know that is the case. Drive to neighborhoods like Georgetown and South Park, who still are suffering not just the highways and inaccessibility, but the very pollutions of their waters and their lands. And as we move forward, we not only have to take steps that don't increase inequity, we have to recognize that inequity exists because of the systemic racism that has existed in our institutions and the wealth inequity that has left people behind. And so every step we take has to be not just to address the climate emergency, it has to be done in a way that recognizes that we owe a duty and a debt to those people who have borne too much of the harm. So we know that we can do it. We will be giving out $250,000 in environmental justice awards. As we fight these devastating impacts, we know that those communities that historically have been underserved and have the worst climate impacts need to have, from us, the city, the support they need to build their own capacity to build the community response to that. This isn't just about the city doing things. This is, we know that in any issue we have, it is community that can deliver what we need. But community can't do that unless we build the capacity. So I'm very excited that we'll be awarding $250,000 to a number of community-based organizations in Seattle, what we will call the Environmental Justice Awards, to do just that. They are led by and benefit those communities that are most impacted. And I want to thank the people behind me. I really want to thank Jessica for taking the lead on that. Recognize the new council member, one who's here in the audience, one who's standing behind me, both Councilmember Lewis and Morales, who have spoken passionately about these issues and who have said that they will make climate one of their priorities, and we welcome that here in City Hall. We have seen youth on our steps every Friday. And we will be, one of the things we're also doing is we've created the Youth Climate Council, and I'm working with what also City Council did to make sure that we make that not just a committee we pull together as a figurehead, but a real and vibrant part of really formulating our policy going forward, bringing them in the room and sitting them at the table and listening and saying, here's what we're doing, help us move a path forward. So again, I am saddened that we have to have an executive order like this. I was fortunate enough to have both my sons home over the holidays, and there is no topic on which they speak more fearfully or more passionately than climate change. And I feel that our generation, in many ways, has not done what it needs to do for the next generation. And I refuse not to take steps. And so we're all in this together, and we've got to show not only that we can do it, but we have the moral obligation to address this. So I'll sign the executive order, and then I think there might be a few questions. The executive order is signed. It is not the only step, but it is an additional step that we need to really make sure that we do what we need to do as a city. And I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank the people who are holding us and making us accountable and will continue to do so. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions. And I really want to, you see a broad array of people. I can't help but call out Jessica here, who our Office of Sustainability and the Environment, who has been working on this issue tirelessly and thinking about how we as a city can do everything to move us to a more equitable and just city, and one that becomes more and more climate friendly. So with that, any questions? Dan, sorry, Kevin.
The new aquarium expansion pavilion is a city structure, or a structure that I believe will be city-owned, that will be built. The plan is to build in the next few years. Will that building be not dependent on fossil fuels?
We have, so there's every building that has been permitted come in one classification, including the arena and the like. But we've made sure that the Ocean Pavilion will use things like advanced heat pump technologies, minimize its carbon footprint. We're in constant conversations with them on what we can do since it's been permitted and in that through part of the process to make sure that we are making it as carbon friendly as possible.
So it won't be covered by, that building won't be covered.
It's not covered by this executive order, but look, this is the minimum threshold. Every project needs to have this kind of scrutiny. And we need to make sure that we are looking as a region and as a city to say, how do we make sure that what we're doing, we reconfigure it to make it as climate friendly as possible? So we are at various stages of development in the city. We constantly are working with people and talking to people about how do we make a project or a development that may be underway in various stages but have a better footprint.
But neither the arena nor the aquarium expansion will be covered by this.
I think that's correct, but let us get you the exact specifications of what parts of it will and what part of it we've worked with them to make sure that they are more climate friendly. Kevin, I cut you off, sorry.
So your second item in order was directing the city departments to develop a plan to eliminate fossil fuel street system buildings. Is there a timeline on that?
Yes, they're bringing it back to me by the end of the year, but a preliminary draft by June 1. Is that right?
I think January 2021 it's due to you.
June 1. No. Preliminary view June 1, final draft January.
And is there a timeline is there a goal for when all buildings would be off?
We really need to do an assessment. It's one reason why I have the head of our facilities department behind us is, as people can appreciate, the city of Seattle owns a vast array of real estate in the city. Everything from community centers to buildings we occupy, to buildings where we have keep our cars, and to the Charles Street Station. And so they're really having to assess in each one of those buildings where they are, how long we're going to keep them. For example, one of the things that we are looking at is for every community center, we have a plan moving forward on how we redevelop community centers. We not only want them to be fossil fuel free, ideally, we will move to a place where every community center has low-income housing and childcare. And so we want to make sure that in totality, we're looking at every building is not just for one thing, but how do we make sure that it is building towards a better Seattle?
Thank you for taking this first step to making sure that we're getting fossil fuels out of our buildings. I'm wondering, we've seen cities like Berkeley and Palo Alto and a whole number of cities in California do this citywide for all city buildings and not just municipal-owned buildings. Do you think that later on in 2020 we'll be seeing a ordinance that will ensure that it's all new buildings in Seattle and not just a small number of buildings that are municipal-owned?
I think we're moving in that direction. I can't give you a time frame, but one of the, I think, important debriefs I had was Councilmember O'Brien when he left, because we know that he had introduced and proposed legislation about no new natural gas. And in doing that, realized that that's why there has to be really important deep engagement with labor community and communities that really have borne the burden of climate change, because the switch over from natural gas to electricity can be a very expensive proposition, and we don't want to harden inequity. So I think we will be having robust discussions on how do we move forward and make sure that we can do that citywide. We're talking to other governments. The county government has a big footprint here. The port has a big footprint here. How do we make sure that we are all working in tandem to not just buildings, but our activities as well? One of the big things you will continue to see, for example, is to increase the electrification of the city fleet and city buses at Metro, so that we can make sure that everything that the city and state governments are touching, that we really are doing what we can do to make it more climate friendly.
Do we have any final media questions? No?
Are you talking to the Seattle School District about this as well?
Yes.
And what are they saying?
I think that they want to be a partner at the table. They're, interestingly, we have to, it's complicated on every front. For example, every time they try to renovate one of their existing schools, many of those schools are landmarked. And so they can't put in different windows that would be more energy efficient. They can't change certain things. So we're working closely with them to see their master plan to say, how do we also make sure that we start moving schools to be not just more climate friendly, but so that the students in those buildings are thriving.
And have you guys, maybe this is for one of the folks on your staff here, one of the issues with O'Brien's bill came up around commercial kitchens and the ability, the dependence on natural gas for cooking. Obviously that's an issue for the school district. I'm sure it's an issue for a bunch of city buildings as well.
It's an issue, and it's a really good point, Kevin, and it's an issue for nonprofits. You know, for example, a couple of our community centers who have the commercial kitchens, those end up being the place where our nonprofits are preparing meals for people experiencing homelessness or for our senior centers. And so one of the things for when we talk about community centers, we're thinking, as we move, how do we change that commercial kitchen and do it in a way that we don't disrupt those services? So there is a lot of those commercial cooking places are serving really fundamental services for our communities. So we have to be super thoughtful about that.
But you're convinced, just in terms of this, what you're putting in this executive order, that for new buildings, you can cover it?
Yes. Any other questions? Thank you for being here. Congratulations, everybody.